Hello, Bible readers. Psalm 20 is interesting. I mentioned in my last post that this would be a royal psalm, and so I expected personally an enthronement psalm or some ceremonial liturgical thing that a crowd might say when a king becomes a king. But that's not what this is at all. This is a be with our king, O God, as he goes off to war kind of psalm. It's kind of hard for a 21st century person to imagine their political leaders also being their military leaders, but that's exactly what a king did for much of history. If your religion believes that the king is a God-given person, that the king is carrying out God's justice, God's laws, God's ways, then you would call on God to do all the God things for that king when he goes off to war. Psalm 20 starts and ends with a petition, a request from the people for God, and it uses the same verb, both at the beginning and the end of the psalm, and it's the verb for how we interpret it as answer. The Lord answer you in the day of trouble. And it finishes with, answer us when we call. So this royal psalm is not being spoken by the royal one, but by the people on behalf of the royal one. They call on God to protect their king, to send help from the sanctuary where God dwells, to give support from Zion, again, where God dwells, to remember all the king's offerings and grant all the king's desires, to fulfill all the king's plans. We're in need here, God, so answer. Do the things for the king so he can accomplish what he wants to accomplish, because we're assuming that's what you, God, want to accomplish. And that's the assumption we 21st century Americans have a much more difficult time buying, right? That a king's desires would be so unquestionably aligned with God's. But it turns out when we get past verse 5, maybe we're not the only ones with some questions about that, because there's two main parts to this psalm. Verses 1 to 5 are all these requests, and then a change comes in verse 6. Some scholars wonder whether when this psalm was used in a worship service, as the community gathers, as the king was off to join battle somewhere, maybe the congregation said the first 5 verses, then a divine oracle of assurance or something before what we know as Psalm 6 would be stated. I talked about the same kind of possibility back in Psalm 13 when the psalmist said, "My foes will rejoice because I'm shaken." And it was all that kind of mood. But then the very next verse in Psalm 13, it was like a different person had come on the scene. "But I trusted in your steadfast love. My heart shall rejoice in your salvation." And that change of gears makes some scholars think that such an about face in mood, maybe there was a response from another person or another group in the congregation who might have said things in between those two moods, like God is good all the time God is good, or whatever, and then the psalmist would then do the changing gears. That's a guess by some scholars. In Psalm 20, a similar kind of change happens between verse 5 and 6. In Psalm 20, verse 5 ends with, "May the Lord fulfill all your petitions," which is the end of a bunch of requests from the people to God on behalf of their king as they hope he gets all his heart desires. But verses 6 to 8, way different. They are not petitions anymore, but are wisdom verses. Verse 7 is especially noteworthy. It says, "Some take pride in chariots and some in horses, but our pride is in the name of the Lord our God. They will collapse and fall, but we shall rise and stand upright." My Bruggeman and Bellinger commentary says these verses contain a critique of military self-sufficiency and offer an alternative in faith that does not seek to master history by force. Aha. which leaves us, readers of Psalm 20, in a strange spot at the end of the psalm. Is this a God and country psalm that's asking God to take our side, which is what the first 5 verses sound like? Or is this a psalm celebrating God's willingness to answer our prayers always, even as our king, or in our case, our soldiers, seamen, Marines, go off to war? Yes, God is willing to answer our prayers while we put more faith in the name of God than in our chariots and horses, our bombs and our tech. So Psalm 20 can be read in a way as though it's an appeal to God to support the war effort. But once you get past verse 5, it can also be read to be a protest against the easy idea that whenever the king feels like taking, then God must want the king to do that. It's a psalm that generates conversation among us more than being a simple tool for us to use when we want our king or country to win. I am one with my God. My God is with us, all of us, at all times and in all places.